Hello, everyone, and welcome to our ESU Happy Hour. Today's presentation is What I Know About Shakespeare and Why It Matters, with guest speaker, Jeff Watkins. I'm Jeff Schnabel from the Happy Hour Committee, and I would like to give a big thank you to the ESU Atlanta branch for sponsoring this happy hour. Ideas for our happy hour lectures come from ESU members and viewers like you. At the end of this program, you will receive a survey where you are encouraged to share your feedback on tonight's lecture. Please send us your ideas for future happy hour programs. Some other notes about tonight's program: there will be a Q&A session at the end. You may submit your questions using either the Q&A or chat modules at the bottom of your screen. You may submit questions at any point during the presentation. However, questions will be answered in the order that they are received. I'm happy to report that we have over 180 registrants for tonight's program. And I would like to give a shout out to the branches with the most registered members. These branches are Atlanta, Central Florida, and New Orleans. So now I would like to introduce Susan Phillips, president of the Atlanta branch, to start off tonight's program.
The Atlanta branch is pleased to sponsor this happy hour today. October 11th is a special day for our branch, as our branch chairman emeritus turns 104 today. Manning Patillo has served the ESU and our branch faithfully since 1975, first as board member, then branch president, and for 21 years as branch chairman. Happy birthday, Manning. I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Jeff Watkins, the founding artistic director of the Atlanta Shakespeare Company at the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse. The Atlanta branch of the ESU has a long and successful history with the Tavern Playhouse in connection with the hosting of our Shakespeare competitions. Jeff Watkins received his degree in theater and mass communications at Trinity University. In 1984, Jeff became the artistic director of the Atlanta Shakespeare Company and has grown this into one of the most prominent Shakespeare repertory companies in the country. He became the first American actor to perform on the stage of Shakespeare's Globe in London in 1995. Jeff has produced Shakespeare's 39 play canon twice. He is also a past president of the International Shakespeare Theater Association. Jeff will speak on why Shakespeare matters and continues to be relevant to our modern world, and most especially to young people. And without further ado, let me welcome Jeff Watkins.
Thank you so very much, and a happy hour indeed it is. It's an honor to be here. And I want you all to know that actually I had my speech all planned out, and then I went to the internet and I started reading about the English Speaking Union, and it changed everything in terms of what I wanted to say tonight. So in the form of extemporaneous speaking that I was taught in high school by people not unlike yourselves, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, and hopefully that will be enough. I'm going to start out by talking about why Shakespeare matters, ultimately in terms of the function of language and what it means to be a modern human being and how Shakespeare figures into that for all English-speaking peoples. After that, I would like to talk about original practice Shakespeare, which is the core aesthetic that we use at the Atlanta Shakespeare Company at the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse here in Atlanta. Following that, I would like to share with you a PowerPoint. Actually, I will say that normally I'm not a PowerPoint person, but when I read about the ESU and its focus on young people and sharing the power of language for all the right reasons, there was a large overlap in terms of a presentation that I had given to a group of folks prior to this, and I thought I would share it because it has beautiful visuals of young people having their lives transformed by Shakespeare, and I thought we would all enjoy that. So let me go back to the top. Why Shakespeare matters. When this topic comes up or when the question is asked, actually I like to go down to the most elemental level. And what I mean by that is the periodic table of elements. I always check on the internet before I speak of this because the number of elements does change over time. Currently there are 118 elements on the periodic table. Those of you who teach science or have been science nerds will understand this. What I'm talking about here are the elements that make up our physical world: helium, oxygen, cobalt, iron, copper, all kinds of stuff. But the one in particular that is most extraordinary is the carbon atom. Of all the elements that make up our physical world, it is the only element that is capable of forming bonds with actually 4 other elements. Silicon, I believe, can only form bonds with 2, and most elements can combine with 1 or 2 or together, which is how we get compounds. But when it comes to the carbon element, that complexity that is made possible by its miraculous ability to form bonds with up to 4 different elements gives us life on this planet. It's what we call organic chemistry. It's why we refer to ourselves and actually every living thing on the planet as a carbon-based life form. Now I go this far down because I want to say that we are a miracle among the many millions of species across the planet. We, Homo sapiens, people like you and I, we are the only species in the entire of existence, certainly as we know it, that is capable of storing information outside of our bodies. I said that one time and my son said, well, Dad, that's not true. A dog will urinate on a tree to mark its territories. That's information outside the body. However, what I'm talking about here is language. It is through language, and more specifically through printed language, that we are able to transmit our thoughts, our aspirations, who we are as a people, to people generations from now. It is how we create over time, basically civilization. Without written language, without the ability to articulate our thoughts and dreams and aspirations, there is no civilization. It is really that fundamental. It is language that has given our species dominion over the planet, and it is our evolutionary advantage over all other creatures. Not that other creatures don't communicate with each other, they certainly do. And I understand that through artificial intelligence, we may have a deeper insight into the linguistic structures of other species. However, we are capable of writing it down. And that is the basis of virtually everything we have as modern human beings. In the Christian Bible, it begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I always want to take a pause there because I want to say, and the Word was God. It is that fundamental to who we are. Now, those of us here who live and breathe, those of us for whom the matrix of our thoughts and our mind is the English language, William Shakespeare is the one human being in our culture, our deepest ancestor, who has given us the most when it comes to language. I sometimes describe him as the chief architect of the English language. That's probably not true because, of course, we had English before that, but he was present as many strands of language were coming together, and essentially he created modern English. Of course, later on in the question and answers, I'm sure I'm going to hear about, what about these rewrites of Shakespeare, or what is it about, the modernization of his text, as opposed to this old-timey language that is Shakespeare. It isn't old-timey, it is modern English. And the deeper you explore the language, the clearer it becomes that fundamentally he spoke in the vernacular of what it means to be a modern human being. Harold Bloom, the great Shakespearean scholar, created a book. It's about yay thick. I wish I could say I've read it all. I have not. However, in the foreword, in the introduction, in the preface, which is where all the great ideas truly are to be found, he talks about the invention of the human. Well, obviously, we had human beings before Shakespeare. However, what he's talking about Shakespeare being someone who invented or articulated what it means to be a modern human being. I like to think of it somehow, it's kind of an analog to what scientists have been doing the last 40 years, which is in the same way that biologists and other scientists have mapped out the human genome. Shakespeare actually mapped out the psychic genome of what it means to be a modern human being. I like to illustrate with text. Zoom is not my medium, but I will give it a shot. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. Forgone all custom of exercises. Indeed, it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, look you, pardon me, I'm going to start over again. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. Forgone all custom of exercise. That this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire. Why, it appears to me no other thing than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is man! How infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, no, nor woman neither. Okay, now that's a depressed individual. I just have to say it. And he wrote that 250 years before Sigmund Freud was even born. So my thesis here is that throughout the 39 plays, the poems, and everything that he has given us, Shakespeare charted the entirety of what it means to be a modern human being. And that's why it matters. It is through language, it is through story, it is through myth that we as modern human beings articulate our aspirations, how we learn and we ask the big questions. What does it mean to be an honorable person? What does it mean to be a good person? To whom do we owe duty? What does it mean to be a good father, a husband, a son, a daughter? These are the questions that have been, why are we here? I mean, these are the big questions. So Shakespeare has given us the matrix whereby we can ask these questions. These are the questions that people from time immemorial have always asked. Our elders, our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors, they've answered them through story and through myth. That is the basis of our religion. It is the basis of the stories we tell our children. It is the basis of our entertainment and the narrative things that we see on television, in movie theaters, and what we read in novels. Language is pretty much everything. And again, when it comes down to Shakespeare, he is the master. He's the chief architect of what it means to think and speak in English. This is incredibly important when, in this particular point in time, when inclusivity, diversity, systemic racism, and a number of other things, we're having to deal with them as a society. I remember I was at a funding hearing. I was at the Fulton County commission meeting where I had to speak on the importance of what Shakespeare was. And I was talking about our education programs and why we should receive taxpayer money to fund these programs for young people. And this old African-American gentleman, as I was leaving, came up to me and he said, "I want to ask you a question, young man." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Why should my tax dollars go to pay for Shakespeare?" And I said to him, I said, "Are you a thinking individual?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Are you thinking? Do you think?" He goes, "Yes, I do." And I said, "What language do you think in?" He goes, "Come again?" I said, "Are you thinking in English?" He goes, "Well, yes, I do. I'm thinking in English." And I said, "Then Shakespeare is your playwright." And he said, "Okay, I get it." I mean, it was that simple. Here was an African-American gentleman whose history, whose life experience probably couldn't have been more different from my own, but all I had to do was make the point that Shakespeare was the chief architect of the language in which he thought. Our society, our culture, we face innumerable, very complex, nuanced problems. At this point, I would like to share one of my favorite quotes, which is, "For every complex, nuanced problem that we face as modern human beings, there is a simple, easily articulated answer that is dead wrong." Fact is, it takes a lot of nuance and complexity to work through these problems, and we need a robust and powerful language. And we, as individuals, as voters, as leaders, as politicians, as teachers, as students, we need to have a shared vocabulary. And it, for us at least, is the English language, and that is why Shakespeare is so foundational and so important. Later on, I'm going to talk about our education programs, and I do want to say that yes, as a producer, as a director, as a young actor who got into this business and created a theater company so that I could act the great roles, that was my primary concern for a very long time. Now, as an older artist, I will tell you that the great joy of my life is to walk into my theater and see an 8, a 9, a 10-year-old or a high school student who has just discovered Shakespeare and has found that 5 or 10 syllable phrase or that scene that perfectly encapsulates what it is they're going through as a human being. To hear a child speak Shakespeare from their own emotional experience, or to have the privilege to be in the room when the light bulb goes off and the language connects and they understand that here is where the power is. Here is where I can find a way to express what it is I'm feeling. And there's virtually nothing that we as human beings can feel that isn't in Shakespeare. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit and you have to get into the deeper repertoire, but again, we'll talk about that a little later. So that's why Shakespeare matters. The second point I'd like to talk about is original practice Shakespeare. Now, the Atlanta Shakespeare Company is an original practice Shakespeare company. The other most notable company that shares this aesthetic would be the American Shakespeare Center in Stanton, Virginia. There are other companies that dabble in this and that sometimes will do this as their particular approach to a play. And it is very popular in some educational circles. Obviously, the Globe, from its inception through the artistic directorship of Dominic Dromgoole, which includes Mark Rylance, was very much the high temple of original practice. However, the Globe currently has swung back to doing what we call conceptual productions of Shakespeare's plays. And that is not original practice. Now, let me tell you what original practice is for us, which is, and actually I discussed this with other practitioners, and we couldn't agree on a whole lot, but we could agree on this. Original practice assumes that every production process begins with a passionate desire to understand the language and the words in the text as they were first understood by those people who spoke them for the first time and those people who heard them for the first time. And from there, we want to bring that meaning to a modern audience with an abiding respect for Shakespeare's own stagecraft. Beyond that, we couldn't agree on much, but we did agree on that. We wanted to understand what it meant at the beginning to those who first experienced it, and we wanted to bring that meaning to a modern audience. And we wanted to respect Shakespeare's own stagecraft, as opposed to what happens in so many theaters and has since about 1972. Now, what happened in 1972 was the English, who pretty much owned Shakespeare up until that point, rebelled against the Victorian tradition of Shakespeare. And when I say Victorian, I mean all the sexuality is tamped down, all the violence is kind of eschewed, and we had a way of presenting Shakespeare that was not what Shakespeare was doing. And then it was kind of stifling things. And then some hotshots came out and said, well, I know, let's do Shakespeare with leather jackets and motorcycles. Let's do Shakespeare's on a trapeze. Let's modernize the setting of the play. Let's deconstruct the play and take the elements that we like and present them to a modern audience through the use of visual metaphor and simile. So one way I like to say this is I say over the past 40 to 50 years, modern theatrical directors and designers have engaged in the creation of visual metaphor and visual simile in counterpoint to and in dialogue with Shakespeare's own text. So when I'm talking to people who are coming into our training programs, I'm saying that I understand where that comes from. I understand what that is, but that is something that we are not concerning ourselves with at all. What we're concerned with is the actor and their relationship, their active relationship with the audience through the text. The mission of my company is the communion of actor and audience through poetry. So you don't want hear anything about modern visual metaphor or simile. Now, I will say that there's a new kid on the block here when it comes to this. They're calling it the decolonization of Shakespeare, which visually looks very much the same as what they used to call the deconstruction of Shakespeare. And what it means is that both spring from a fundamental assumption that Shakespeare as he is, or as the text exists, from its own place in time, cannot speak to a modern audience. I do not believe that. I believe Shakespeare speaks most clearly from his own place in time. The genius of Shakespeare is that he created brilliant, phenomenal characters that lived well beyond the strictures of the culture from which they spring. Now, it shouldn't be coincidental, not coincidental, that's the wrong word. It shouldn't be surprising that Elizabethan England is very similar to what we experience in America. You know, we're navel gazers. We think we're it. We're the bee's knees. We're the center of civilization is what we are. And we have classism and we have racism and we have all these other things. And we have these strictures that may or may not be just. Those injustices are shown to us by Shakespeare when he holds the mirror up to nature. But in deconstruction of Shakespeare, or this new idea of decolonizing Shakespeare, we change the language or we change the setting to be more in harmony with what we perceive or judge to be our own modern sensibility. And that's how you get a production of Julius Caesar where Mark Antony is carrying a Tommy gun. That's where you get a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that is set on a moon base. That's where you get The Merry Wives of Windsor set in a hair salon in Brazil. And I'm sure many of you have seen productions like this. They are concept productions that spring from this idea that Shakespeare cannot speak as clearly from his own place in time. And Original Practice Shakespeare Company will recognize that what Shakespeare has given us is a distillation from nature. It is poetry. It is therefore, by definition, complete. And I would say, woe betide the fool that decides they're going to gild that lily. Woe betide the idiot who thinks they're going to improve upon it, or take Shakespeare and take it from his own milieu and move it over to some other artificially created place and show it to us in an effort to show us something maybe the playwright missed, or show us something the playwright intended but didn't write effectively. I don't second guess Shakespeare. From the beginning, and this was an accident of my life, I came through a good drama school, but they taught me no Shakespeare. So when I came to it in the professional world, I didn't know how to conceptualize Shakespeare. I didn't know how to deconstruct Shakespeare. So what I did was I took the play and I put it on stage with as few directorial choices as possible, without an editorial viewpoint, and I fell in love with its simplicity, its power, and its grace. And that's what it means for us to be an original practice Shakespeare. The other thing about original practice Shakespeare is it's considerably more economical to produce, and you can do it at a much faster rhythm. We know from certain sources that Shakespeare's company would perform 1 or 2 plays every given week, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 plays a week. A new play would come into being, perform 3 or 4 times, go away, come back later that month. Over the course of an entire season, they might do 40 or even 50 plays. These people were incredibly prolific, but bear in mind, they weren't reinventing their set for each production. They weren't using a whole different wardrobe for each production. They weren't rebuilding it each and every time they wanted to do something. Theater was what happened at the Globe. The Globe could be anything for the playwright at any time through the stroke of a pen. So it all centered on the actor, the text, and the audience, and the communion of actor and audience through poetry. So that's what it means to be an original practice Shakespeare Company. I wish there were more of them in America. I wish there were more of them in the world. I will say that I have no moral repugnance for conceptual Shakespeare or deconstructivist Shakespeare. In the hands of a well-funded genius, it can be delightful. However, a normal person coming to Shakespeare for the first time is confused and wonders why Mark Antony is carrying a Tommy gun. So come to the Shakespeare Tavern and you can see original practice Shakespeare. We do more Shakespeare than any company in America, sometimes as many as 11 or 12 or even 13 titles over the course of a year. And then the next year we'll recycle a third of those and then add some more. So that's original practice Shakespeare. And hopefully for those of you who have always wondered, who are all those, actually, I'm going to tell you a story. Here was my mother went to see The Tempest. And this was after I left home, and she wrote me a little letter. We used to write letters, and she said, Jeff, I went to see The Tempest, and I've seen you do it 2 or 3 times. Who are the naked men? I called her up on the phone. I said, what do you mean? She says, the naked men. I went to see this Tempest, and they had all these naked men pulling on a rope off stage. And I said, I'm not sure I get you. She goes, well, I certainly didn't understand it. And of course, what it had to do with was it was a visual metaphor that had to do with slavery, and Prospero was a slave owner and these people pulling on this thing. But of course, I'm thinking equity actors, costumes, a very great deal of expense. And it confused my mother of all people. And she had seen a good bit of Shakespeare. So I said, next time you see that director, you should walk up to him and say, who are the naked men? So we don't do that at the Shakespeare Tavern, and it works for us. So now I'd like to share something with you, and this comes from my research with you guys. What you do for young people with the competitions that we have hosted at our theater for, I want to say it was 1995, 96 when we first started doing that. We've done it every year, and we love it. So I'm going to share my screen because here we are. There we go. Let's see what we got. We're going to share this screen for you. Share. Let's see if this comes up. Okay, sharing the screen. Everybody can see that? I am screen. Can someone give me a verbal confirmation that you're seeing what I'm sharing?
We see it, Jeff.
Gotcha, thank you. The Atlanta Shakespeare Company at the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse. Here to your left is actually our playhouse, which is on Peachtree Street. I'm running my mouse over it right now. And to the right is just a production photograph of our most recent production of Pericles, Prince of Tyre. For many years, actually, we have one single 200-seat theater in which we do about 255 performances over the course of a year of up to a dozen or even 13 or 14 plays over that year. For many years, we've been constrained by our physical reality, and I have charted a vision for a larger venue that would give us an Elizabethan playhouse that could house up to 420 people, plus a theater like the one that you might see here a little bit later, and another space so that we could do even more. Now, of course, this would do a lot for our education programs, and that's what this PowerPoint is about. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Go. Whoops. Go back here. This is what we're contemplating building. This to the right is what we already have, and this is a larger theater company here. So we'd keep what we have, and we would add this other space as well. Now, that would do a lot for our education programs. Now, I want to say that over many, many years, we have a lot of existing partnerships with the Opera Company, different theater companies, Clayton County Schools, Gwinnett Schools, Forsyth Schools, Coffee County Schools, Chamblee Charter High School, Farrell High School, a lot of different schools and colleges, etc. So these are existing that we have developed over the past 25 or 30 years. But this is what I really wanted to share with you, which is a quote from me. More than any other single factor, the use and command of the English language will determine the success or failure of any given student as they seek to graduate high school and achieve their dreams as a productive member of society. And I say that because I believe it's true. Whether you're an immigrant and English is your second language, whether you were born here, whether you come from a good family, whether a single parent home, if you've grown up in poverty or riches, language is the matrix through which you will succeed or fail. This creates a nightmare or an opportunity. In Georgia, any child to graduate high school must study Shakespeare 3 times in their freshman, sophomore, and senior years. Through our work with thousands of young people over 2 decades, we've learned that Shakespeare has the potential to become a recurring academic nightmare and a significant contributing factor to a child deciding to leave school before graduating, or to introduce an opportunity to introduce and reinforce the power, grace, and relevance of Shakespeare's language over 4 years, beginning as early as possible. If, in a nutshell, if we can get there in the 3rd or 4th grade and get them to understand something about Shakespeare, then every time they encounter it in their academic school career, they'll think, oh yeah, I can do this. This is something I'm good at. And then it grows from that point. And it's almost, it doesn't matter how early you start. I swear to God, it starts in pre-K. ASC's education program portfolio brings live Shakespeare in performance to kids beginning as early as kindergarten. The programs are deliberately designed to build one upon the other and are available at every stage of education, from our Shakespeare Says in-class workshops for K through 2nd grade, all the way up through our post-baccalaureate apprentice training program for young theater professionals, which is the primary source from which we get our actors. They're not drama programs, nor are they elective in any way. We coordinate with language arts and English literature teachers, and our program content is a primary foundational component of the core curriculum, no less so than algebra, physical science, or American history. In any given school year, we reach more than 25,000 students, this is pre-pandemic, in 6 states and 51 Georgia counties, from 190 K through 12 schools, including 122 public schools and 69 private schools, 14 colleges and universities, and 12 homeschool community centers and early childhood centers. This is 51 counties, and if you live in one of those counties in Georgia, you know what I'm talking about. Plus Alabama, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. And there's a band field trip that happens every 2 years coming down from Massachusetts that joins us. These are the names of the schools. These are actual relationships that we have developed over many, many years. They're all over the place. I will also say that this is why we are the Atlanta Shakespeare Company at the Shakespeare Tavern Playhouse. People kid me about our corporate identity, but you can't take a Shakespeare Tavern to a Covenant Christian school. You can take the Atlanta Shakespeare Company. So we are the Atlanta Shakespeare Company. The name of our primary building happens to be the Shakespeare Tavern. 67 K through 12 schools, private, 14 colleges and universities in this slide, there have been 19, 12 homeschool groups, community centers, early childhood centers. For well over a decade, we have maximized the potential of our single 200-seat theater to consistently serve an average of 56,000 people, including 22,000 high school kids. This is history along here. Beyond to the right of this red line is what we believe we could do if we had adequate facilities. I want to say that with 2 new performing spaces, we could quadruple the number of students that we reach by year 6. We could easily do 127,000 or maybe even as many as 150,000 kids a year. Our educational mission is centered on bringing this great body of dramatic literature to a whole new generation of young people, with particular emphasis. Now, this really gets me going. Creating programs that afford students the opportunity to speak Shakespeare in performance themselves and from their own emotional experience. The heart of that are our after-school residencies, where we will send 1 or 2 or 3 of our professional actors to a school, and they will spend 3 to 4 hours after each school day working with kids for up to a month, and the kids will do a 2-hour performance of a Shakespeare play for their own school. Then they'll come to our theater and perform it on our professional stage. It is just a revelatory, transformative program for these young people who get that deeply into a play and can speak these plays from their own emotional experience. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that when the kids are speaking or they're learning the lines, we don't tell them what it means. We ask them, what does it mean to you? What could it mean to you? And we get them to form their own relationship with this text. And that's what they use. That's what we use in our school performances. We do get some strange choices that way, but we're more concerned with the emotional connection of Shakespeare's text as opposed to them getting it right in the conventional sense. We think we could quadruple the number of performance residencies we do if we had more space, but we'll talk about that. But it's not just about the theater, it's about bringing the grace, the beauty, and the power of Shakespeare's language to a whole new generation. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what brings a smile to my face. When I walk into my theater and I see these kids up here and they've been working on it, they spent, a month, and they're doing a 2-hour cutting of a play that maybe is only 2 hours and 20 minutes. They're doing almost the whole play, and they mean it. And we can involve 16 or 20 kids in it in different ways. This one, they kind of had a modern take on it. We allow that when we don't do that professionally, but if that's what's going to connect to the kids, that's what we do. And it's just extraordinary what happens. Actually, these kids now as young adults are coming to my theater. I recognize them now. I see them here right now. I see these guys there. They come to my theater as adults. Some of them are bringing their own children to my theater. And that's what lets me know that my work is not in vain and we're actually doing it. So I'm here to tell you that Shakespeare matters. And I told you why it matters. And in the faces of these young people, I think you can see that what we're doing is an extraordinary thing. So I told you why Shakespeare matters. I've talked a little bit about original practice Shakespeare and what it means to have a communion of actor and audience through the text. And I've also shared with you some information about our educational programs and our aspirations in the future. It is 5:40. I sometimes like to end these lectures by saying, and I know you're all familiar with this, but I thought it'd be a neat party trick, and let's see if I can do it from memory. I kind of mangled the Hamlet earlier, but it's been a long time since I played that role. If you cannot understand my argument and declare it's Greek to me, you're quoting Shakespeare. If you claim to be more sinned against than sinning, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you recall your salad days, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you act more in sorrow than in anger, if your wish is father to the thought, if your lost property is vanished into thin air, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you have ever refused to budge an inch or suffered from green-eyed jealousy, if you have played fast and loose, if you have been tongue-tied, a tower of strength, hoodwinked, or in a pickle, if you have knitted your brows, made a virtue of necessity, insisted on fair play, slept not 1 week, danced attendance on your lord and master, had short shrift, cold comfort, or too much of a good thing, if you have seen better days, or lived in a fool's paradise, why, be that as it may, the more fool you, for it is a foregone conclusion that you are, as good luck would have it, quoting Shakespeare. If you think it is high time, if you think it is early days and clear out bag and baggage, if you think it is high time and that is the long and the short of it, if you think the game is up and the truth will out, even if it involves your own flesh and blood, if you lie low till the crack of doom because you suspect foul play, if you have your teeth set on edge at one fell swoop without rhyme or reason, why then to give the devil his due, for surely if you have a tongue in your head, you are quoting Shakespeare. Even if you bid me good riddance and send me packing, if you wish I was dead as a doornail, if you think I'm an eyesore, a laughing stock, the devil incarnate, a stony-hearted villain, a blinking idiot, or a bloody-minded, or a blinking idiot, why then, by Jove, tut, tut, for goodness sake, what the dickens, but me no but, it's all one to me, for you are quoting Shakespeare. That's by Bernard Levin. He assembled that from all of Shakespeare, and I'm telling you, he's the architect of who we are. Time for questions.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff, for your thoughtful insight into Shakespeare. You have really given us a new perspective on Shakespeare, which will help, I think, all of us to better understand his plays. So now let's take some questions from our audience. The first one here is, what effect did the early elements, earth, fire, and water, have on Shakespeare's writings?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I want to tell you that so reminds me of a Q&A question that I got after we did a matinee for some high school students. The student raised his hand. I said, yes. He says, could you discuss the use of light and dark imagery in this play that you just performed for us? Which let me know that the students would be writing an essay and having to answer questions on Macbeth. But let me talk about this, the elements of earth, fire, and water in Shakespeare's writing. The Elizabethans had a very different way of looking at things. You've heard about the different humors in the body, and they would attribute, physical maladies or particular, psychological disorders to an imbalance of the humors. Another thing which I sometimes like to acknowledge is when I think of what we think of as gravity. Sir Isaac Newton had an apple and he dropped it and it fell to the ground. Okay, the Elizabethans would say that the apple was of the ground. In other words, it was a product of the earth. Therefore, when you let go of it, it fell, it is attracted to the ground. That's why it falls to the ground. The same thing as if you were to snuff out a candle, the flame is of the air. Therefore, when you put it out, the smoke rises and goes back to its origin. It goes back to the air. So that's the way they viewed things. It's a very poetic way of looking at our physical reality, and I think it's quite lovely. We know, of course, that the apple, when it drops, it is because the apple has a very small mass and the earth has a very large mass, and the large mass exerts a gravitational pull on the apple. And through science, we have learned to calculate that, to quantify that, and we can predict it. And that's why the scientific vocabulary is considerably more useful than the Elizabethan vocabulary. However, the Elizabethans did not have that vocabulary. It was before Sir Isaac Newton, so they had their own explanation of it. Now, what I like to say is I like to say that when you release the apple and it falls to the ground, that is the thing itself. The Elizabethans may have had one vocabulary, and we may have a superior vocabulary, but the thing itself remains the same. And that is true, I believe, of religion. It's true of the myths of the ancient, and it's true for every culture. We answer these questions through language, which mathematics is a language, physics is a language, calculus is a language. This is how we address these things. But in our everyday lives, we're thinking in English. So, I mean, that is an example of earth, fire, and water. But, you know, he lived in that world. It was a very concrete world. You know, people really believed if you dug a hole deep enough, you'd come to hell, because that's where it was. It was beneath your feet. The angels were above the cloud, and God is in his heaven. Very literal, very fundamental. So, you know, in terms of the physical elements, the earths of earth, fire, and water, you know, they would have that. They also, actually, I'm getting some ribbing for this because we actually have an artist who's painting the astrological signs on the balcony, our audience balcony in our theater. I'm doing this over here, off frame. You know, astrology was, you know, existed there. And of course, they had those thoughts as well. There are fire signs, water signs, and I'm sure people attributed that as well. But their entire perception of the physical world had a good deal of superstition to it, a lot of religion, and of course, an understanding of the humors. And I guess you could say that earth, fire, and water are the humors of nature.
Very good. Okay, let's move along. The next question is, did not the Greeks and Romans think they were modern?
They did. I do see Marilyn Campbell pointed out that the beginning of the Christian Bible, I didn't mean to say Genesis. I meant to say the Gospel of St. John if I didn't. I know it's St. John. I went to I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and actually a good friend of mine does the Gospel of John from memory as a piece. I didn't say Genesis. I think I might have just said the beginning of the Christian Bible. Actually, you know, Genesis would be, anyway, but I want to acknowledge that. So the Greeks and Romans, of course, thought they were modern. Everybody thinks they're modern. Any civilization thinks they're on the cutting edge of human thought. It is interesting that Lucretius in 530 BC, I believe it was, we think of him as I can't remember the name of that. It's a particular school of thought of Greek philosophy. Lucretius was the originator of it, but he actually came up with the idea, and he articulated the concept that the whole of our physical reality is made up by tiny little bits of matter that cannot be broken down any further than they are. Essentially, it is a description of atomic theory that he came to through observation, presumably of decomposition of living things and other structures. But and that actually has stood the test of time. Before microscopes, before electricity, before a lot of things, a guy named Lucretius came up with essentially atomic theory, and that's something I should be able to cite a little bit more clearly. But the Greeks and the Romans, of course, they thought they were the most modern. A lot changed in the early 1800s when we got to steam power. You know, before we had steam, all we had was the mechanical power by water wheels, and pretty much everything else was muscle power. It was either human muscle, enslaved people muscle, or animal muscle. That's how we moved things and built things. It was all done by that. But pretty much everybody thinks they're on the cutting edge.
All right. Well, now this question could be a little difficult, but in just a few sentences, what or how do you teach in your summer programs for students?
We teach by asking questions. And actually, I wanted to do this. Where are we here? Gonna do that. Okay. So the students come in, and actually, what they do, they audition and they create it. Actually, Laura Cole is on this call. She's our director of education. She could answer this question a lot better than I can. But when the kids show up, they will audition, and the teachers will then pick the play. They'll pick the play based on what kids they have and who's there in the room and what seems to be the right project. We obviously we do A Midsummer Night's Dream. Obviously we do Much Ado About Nothing. We do The Tempest. We do the obvious titles of the titles because that's what's appropriate with these kids. It's their first experience. We might know these plays very well, but it's their first time out. But we will also do other plays, deeper plays. We've had kids do King John. We had some kids do a production of Love's Labor's Lost that was so phenomenal. I put it on my main stage for my adult patrons to see. And in the direction of that, it begins with having the children bring their own selves to the room to be fully present. I mean, we're not there to teach them how it should be done. We're trying to explore the play with this group of individuals, and we ask the kids, what do they think this text means? And they will answer. And then we give that a shot. And then through that question, that back and forth, the young people have an investment in the way they're speaking this text that comes from their own emotion and their own life experience, whatever that may be. And it's through that process that we build these plays. We do costume them with our professional stock, but if the kids have a different idea, we'll go with that, and then that's how we do it. The methodology was shared with us by Tina Packer and the late great Dennis Krosnick at Shakespeare Company. Kevin Coleman is their director of education, and Laura has trained there. I have trained there. Many of our senior company members have trained there, and our education artists as well. They're actually doing a workshop at the Shakespeare Tavern here this next weekend. It's a long-term relationship, and it's an extraordinary pedagogy that they have shared with us. And like I say, it turns my crank every time I see it.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, the next question. Several years ago, you had performances on Saturday mornings for children, and the plays were acted by children. Do you still have such performances?
We do not currently. That was actually another company that worked with us called the Kaleidoscope Children's Theater. And I will say that I liked that. I liked what they were doing, but it was a different company. We didn't share actors. We were allowing our space to be used as we do with other companies. And they had someone there who was creating not Shakespeare, but performances of classic fairy tales that would involve 1 or 2 adult actors and then 3 to 5 child actors. And they would perform at 11 and 2 on Saturdays, and I think 2 p.m. on Sundays. I did recently have a conversation with some folks saying that it was a good idea. I enjoyed it, and that if we had the bandwidth or if we had more facility space, we might be able to do something similar to that again. That was, like I say, it had 2 or 3 professional actors and the young people. The stuff that we're doing with our live performance residencies and our summer programs for, again, K through 2, I think grades 3 through 7, I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, and then the high school level, those kids are creating the plays, and all of the actors are children, unless, for some reason somebody falls out at the last minute and we have to substitute one of our teachers.
All righty, let's move on here. This is a thought-provoking question. You said that Shakespeare came from a simple educational background. In what way did he get to be so wise about human character? How was he able to write such universal characters?
Well, I don't know that I would say he came from a simple educational background. I mean, it's well known that he went to the King's New School in Stratford, which was an early version of public education, where the town council and the citizens got together. You know, where they drew the line in terms of who got to go there, I mean, I don't know that. It was a Jesuit priest, Simon Hunt, I want to say was the guy's name, who came to it with a classical education, probably Oxford, that kind of thing, well versed in Latin and Greek, in myth, I guess a classical education, and the ancients, and that was the basis of his education. There was an upper and a lower school. We know that Shakespeare went through all of that, and then somehow managed to get himself to London. That is the basis of some cockeyed conspiracy theories about why Shakespeare couldn't have written it, because how could a middle class or the son of a glover be so much of a genius and know so much about so many things? I would say that you could ask Paul McCartney how he could be such a genius coming from a working class place. How do you know so much? Bob Dylan, Mozart. The world is full of folks who could do that. Or who came out of wherever they came out of to become what they did. This was an explosion of the printing press. There were a lot of books available that someone could get their hands on, and we could learn that. If you have done the entire Shakespearean canon, as I have twice, actually the second time we did it, it took 8 years and 7 months. We did all the histories in the order they were written. I mean, all the comedies in the order they were written, all the tragedies in the order they were written, the romances in the order they were written, and then the histories. We called it the Shakespeare Evolution series, and we wanted to kind of trace, the development of the playwright through each genre. And I think the most telling thing is actually Two Gentlemen of Verona, which was one of his earliest comedies. And what must have happened between the writing of Two Gentlemen of Verona and a play with the sophistication of The Merchant of Venice or, say, Romeo and Juliet. The Two Gentlemen of Verona, if you read it and you look at it, has very little life knowledge. Doesn't know anything about falconry, doesn't know anything about carpentry or government or what life at court is like. He doesn't know anything about what it means to be in love. Knows very little about anything except an innate sense of comedy. There are some scenes in there that are repeated later in other plays, much more forcefully and more effectively used later on than they are in that play, but that is very much a juvenile play. It's exactly the kind of play you would expect a college sophomore to cram and create in the last 3 days before the deadline and turn it in. Not a great play. Still worth doing, and again, we've done it, I don't know, half a dozen times. But you can see that from there, as he progressed as a playwright through his entire career, he learned, he grew exponentially. Obviously, he did have access to a deep library. Whether it was his own personal library, is anybody's guess, no one knows. That is a question that people have. My thinking is my speculation is he had access through his patrons and through other relationships to whatever it was that he needed in a literary vein. And then, of course, human nature is human nature, and knowledge is virtually everywhere for the wise and those who can absorb it. So that's what I believe. We just did a play called By My Will that basically, that's fundamentally what it says is its core thesis. It is inherently classist to assume that someone of a limited education from a poor neighborhood is incapable of genius, when we have so many examples where that is not the case.
Okay, Jeff. Well, I think our time is almost over for today. So again, a big thanks to Susan Phillips of the ESU Atlanta branch for inviting Jeff Watkins to our happy hour today. And of course to Jeff for sharing his Shakespeare expertise with us today. Now, before I turn over our happy hour to Karen Karpowicz, I would like to remind everyone that our ESU annual conference in Kansas City, my hometown, is coming in a week and a half. We'll have some great panel discussions, breakout sessions, and outstanding guest speakers. We hope you all can attend. Now, our executive director, Karen Karpowicz, will have some concluding remarks. Hello, Karen.
Hi, Jeff. I just want to thank you, Jeff. It's serendipitous. Your discussion was serendipitous today because I was having some discussions today about our conference in Kansas City about partnerships and local partnerships in particular, and how our branches can really kind of engage with local arts organizations to help them build their Shakespeare programs and all their other programs, and the power of that connection. So your conversation was very, very timely, because I think, you know, what you offer and your understanding of Shakespeare and the importance of Shakespeare to many of our branches is a challenge at this time, because certain schools in certain parts of the country are not teaching Shakespeare to the degree that they should be. And I would also love to invite you to New York in April when we have our National Shakespeare Competition at Lincoln Center. Please come and be our guest and observe our wonderful students who will compete on the stage at Lincoln Center. I invite you. I want to thank the Atlanta branch, and I want to thank Jeff and everyone involved in the Atlanta branch for this wonderful program. Again, these programs are curated by our branches and really expose us to all the incredible talent out there that we have access to as a national organization. As Jeff said, I hope I see you in Kansas City. And anybody who wants to register at the last minute, please do feel free to call me, and I will honor the early bird price if you register as a result of today. Thank you again. And I hope to see you all back here on November the 15th, when we'll be involved in a very different period, the Regency period, talking about the ending of Regency marriages with Mr. James Naylor. Thank you again, and have a lovely evening.